Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Jen Weiss. I'm a Senior Policy Associate at the Nicholas Institute at Duke University, and I am so excited that you all have joined the webinar today. The webinars are now, I think, becoming the new norm, right? So we're going to be doing a lot more of these, but thank you for joining us. I am really excited to have our speakers today. During our South Carolina energy efficiency roadmap discussions, the concept of green banks and on-bill have come up quite frequently. So I thought it would be good to get some experts on the line to explain what the finance mechanisms are and to help answer your questions. And so that's what we're here for today. I am so excited about our agenda and the speakers that we have today. They are all experts in their fields, and I think you're going to find what they talk about very interesting, and I hope that it generates a lot of questions because we're looking forward to all of the questions that you all have. On our agenda is Green Bank 101. We have Jill Bunting from the Coalition for Green Capital. Jill is the Deputy Director at the Coalition. And next up will be Wesley Holmes, who's the Director of Strategy and Development at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. And Wesley will talk about On-Bill 101. And then finally, we have Mike Smith, who's the Manager of Conservation and Energy Efficiency at the Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina. And Mike's going to give us a really great example of an on-bill program with the co-ops in South Carolina called Help My House. And then we'll have a good chunk of time that we can use for questions and answers. Please use the chat function of the Zoom technology in order to send those over to me, and I will go through them and hope to get them all answered today. I have muted all of your lines except for the speakers, but please feel free to use that chat function as you need to. And we hope to get you all wrapped up by 4:30 today. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jill Bunting from the Coalition for Green Capital, who is one of the premier experts on green banks. So welcome, Jill.
Great, Jen. Thanks very much. And I think you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Perfect. Well, thanks again to Jen, and thanks to everyone for joining. Hello, everyone. I'm Jill Bunting. I'm the Deputy Director of the Coalition for Green Capital. CGC is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on the creation, support, and growth of financing institutions that are dedicated to clean energy lending. In the U.S., these types of organizations are often called green banks, though, as we'll discuss in a little bit, that they're not traditional banks. They're actually a little bit of a different animal. Our work at CGC spans the U.S., and it's primarily my focus at the organization, but increasingly we're working with countries outside the U.S., such as South Africa, Rwanda, and in parts of Latin America to establish similar types of institutions. Today, I'm going to provide a general overview of what a green bank is and what kinds of work green banks are doing in the U.S. And I'll focus particularly on a few examples of the work that green banks have done in the energy efficiency space, including their support for some on-bill programs. As Jen said, we have reserved time for questions at the end, and I would just really encourage you all to submit ones as we go along. All right, let's go to the next slide. So let's start with a definition. What is a green bank? I'll read this and then go into some more details about some of the specific phrases here. So green banks are mission-driven institutions that use innovative finance to accelerate the transition to clean energy and fight climate change. So let's start with the first part of that, mission-driven. As I mentioned at the outset of this, green banks are not banks. They do not take deposits. They're not members of FDIC. They're not trying to take companies public like an investment bank. And in fact, they don't even have the term bank in their name in many geographies. However, like banks, they are engaged in lending activity. What differentiates them from traditional actors is this type of mission orientation. Green banks are dedicated to growing the overall market for clean energy, not simply getting more deals that just have their logo on them and making sure that their brand name gets out there. As a result, green banks have a really different market focus than traditional actors. They aim to take on the hard problems and build solutions to those problems. As the market that the green bank's working in matures, the green bank will aim to really just work itself out of the job by demonstrating a model that can be repeatable, that can ultimately be taken over potentially by the private sector. Great. So we also often talk about green banks as being institutions, which is really just another way of saying that green banks have a brain. They're not looking to dogmatically apply a single tool or product to their market, but rather they're reacting to markets and barriers and really proactively creating solutions. They're also designed to be long-lived so they can provide a consistent hand in the market. Many green banks either already are or in the process of becoming financially self-sustaining to ensure that they can stick around to be long-term partners for the financiers, contractors, and end users that they interact with. In terms of how these are actually structured, many green banks are effectively independent institutions, but even those that are housed within a broader institution have this kind of lens of creating a durable operating model within the green banking division of the overall organization. And great, the last part of this definition that I'll highlight is that green banks are focused on using the tools of finance. This really allows them to magnify the impact of each dollar they receive, since the money that they're lending out comes back to them and can be reinvested in future projects. And really on a practical side, if they're ever helping to become self-sustaining, they need to earn a return on their investments that they make. While the green banks are really focused on finance, this is not to say that grants or other types of tools are off the table entirely. And really, in fact, it's unusual for a green bank to simply offer a financing solution on its own. Green banks almost always provide financing in the context of broader market development activities, and some of the examples I highlight later will speak to that. Great. So I'll spend the next 2 slides providing some context of what the current ecosystem of green banks looks like in the US. The first thing to know is that there's a growing network of state and local green banks in the country, and it spans the entire continent from Rhode Island to Hawaii, with many other states in various stages of exploring the creation of something that looks like a green bank. Some of these institutions are wholly formed within the public sector and capitalized with public dollars, and others have been formed as independent nonprofits, and they're getting their money from a mix of sources, including public and philanthropic. Adding to this diversity, green banks typically have unique market focuses and investment strategies, and I'll speak to the approach some of these institutions are taking in energy efficiency later. If you're sort of interested in learning more about individual institutions, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the annual report of the American Green Bank Consortium, which is a project of CGC that serves as a compendium of information about these types of institutions. So the second thing I wanted to highlight about this ecosystem is that it really is having an impact of moving capital to clean energy projects. In the US, total green bank investment has likely, at this point, exceeded $4 billion. And globally, that number is over $50 billion. One unique feature of green banks is their interest in partnering with commercial and other private sector lenders to, quote unquote, crowd in capital into clean energy markets. The focus on crowding in or leveraging necessarily sort of varies by institution and project, but on average, green banks leverage about $3 of private capital for each dollar of mission-driven capital. Bringing this kind of lens to investing can magnify the impact of public and other types of mission-driven dollars that are at green banks. So let's talk a little about the kinds of roles that green banks take in the markets that they're working in. This table shows 4 common barriers where projects get stuck and their associated green bank interventions or solutions. There are some projects, for example, where the newness of the market is a barrier to getting traditional lenders involved. In that kind of instance, there's a role to be played in providing a backstop to encourage early participation in some transactions through the creation of a credit enhancement. In some other markets, the project is so new that there is need for a lender to take on the brain damage of doing the first few transactions themselves, and the green bank might come in and do all the lending for the first few to provide that track record. Other projects are simply just too small to attract the interest of traditional lenders and need an entity who's willing to bundle or aggregate all those individual deals into something that can be taken over by a traditional lender. The most important thing to note about all of these barriers is that it's rare for them to be, there to be just one thing that the green bank's trying to solve for in a market. They often appear side by side. And in general, when we talk about how green banks approach developing financing tools, we try to encourage them to be Swiss Army knives, which is to say building products and solutions that can take on multiple roles to address multiple barriers in order to achieve the outcome that they're trying to get to. That being said, sometimes it is helpful to be more of a sledgehammer and really focus on just 1 or 2 market barriers in a particular part of your geography that the green bank can help break down. Great, so I want to highlight a few of the energy efficiency focused financing programs at green banks. The first is a type of credit enhancement that is being deployed by, I think, at least 3 green banks at this point, and that's Connecticut Green Bank, Michigan Saves, and the Montgomery County Green Bank. The exact nature of the programs at each one of these institutions varies a little bit, but in general, the challenge and the type of solution they're providing is pretty consistent. Each of them saw that there was a greater need for access to unsecured energy efficiency lending in their geography. This is for things like homeowners looking to finance new equipment, do air sealing, things like that. For that kind of loan, these are often small loans, so it may not make sense for a homeowner to take out a home equity line of credit or go through the process of doing something else. So the issue is that the other issue is that if they could take out, instead of doing that, they might also try to take out a loan on a credit card, but that would erode the savings that were generated by the project. However, local banks and credit unions, who might be another source of financing for this type of energy efficiency improvement, can be reluctant to enter this type of market, since it really does look a little bit different than the kind of lending that they're used to doing. They may think the demand is uncertain, it's a small loan, all these types of things. And of course, these are unsecured loans, so banks can't look to the traditional collateral to be sure they're going to be paid back. So in each one of these markets, what the Green Bank did is develop a loan loss reserve fund in partnership with their local contracting and lending community to really prime the pump in this market. I think what's really important here is that the Green Bank played a role not just in providing the loan loss reserve, but also in educating the banking and contracting community about the market itself. The Green Banks really took on the brain damage of developing the list of approved measures and the verification process that would be used by the program, as well as helping to market the program to potential customers. So it was really a programmatic approach. The result has been hundreds of millions of energy efficiency projects financed. Michigan State in particular has quite a large program. And since the Green Bank is using its capital and credit enhancement capacity rather than direct lending, they're also seeing a very high leverage ratio of Green Bank capital to private capital, which is to say that a little bit of Green Bank capital is stretching far in the market. And finally, the default rate has been extremely low for these loans, pretty much as close to zero as you can get. So it's also providing useful data to the market about the true risk of lending into energy efficiency, which is useful for banks as they're looking to develop energy efficiency more broadly. So credit enhancements are one way Green Banks look to sort of move the needle on the energy efficiency market. This page highlights just 3 other roles that Green Banks have taken on in energy efficiency. I'll start in the first row with NYSEG, which is the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. NYSEG has a range of really interesting and innovative financing offerings for energy efficiency, and this is just one of their program areas. Just a little bit of context, the New York City government was running a program called the Green Housing Preservation Program, which provided low or no interest loans to finance energy efficiency and water conservation improvements, lead remediation, that kind of thing, for small and medium-sized buildings in New York City. It's a really attractive program, but the challenge in using it is that obviously building owners need to know what they're going to use it for. So NYSEG developed a process to finance up to $40,000 in pre-development expenses with a really simple and straightforward approval process. This included things like testing for lead or asbestos, engineering studies, things like that. And by streamlining this process up front, NYSEG allowed much more capital to be unlocked down the line. And I think this is also a really nice example of how a Green Bank can partner with and complement existing public programs, which is a common role that Green Banks play in their geographies. The next example I wanted to highlight is from Hawaii with the Green Energy Money Saver On-Bill program, which is usually referred to as GEMS, and GEMS is with a $sign at the end. I know there's a lot more discussion of on-bill coming up with the next speakers, so I won't go into too much detail on the mechanics here, but I wanted to highlight the Green Bank's role in providing the capital and underwriting capacity to make this program work in Hawaii. This program is focused on low-income customers and open to renters, which is particularly important in that state because renters are a disproportionate share of the population in Hawaii. The response has been really strong. I think in the first year, which closed in 2019, they financed over $1.2 million in improvements, and I think it's gone up significantly since then. And the last 2 examples were places where Green Banks are putting capital to work. In this final example I want to highlight comes from Colorado and is focused more on the technical assistance side. This deal is set to close in the next quarter, so there's no press coverage yet, but I can give you a sense of what happened. For some context, there's a municipal utility in Colorado that was looking to borrow third-party capital to expand its on-bill program. And the municipal utility was having trouble finding commercial capital to do that. They were seeing that commercial lenders were either uninterested because they weren't comfortable with on-bill, or they were offering the municipal utility rates and terms that just didn't work for the payback period of these improvements. So the Green Bank in Colorado, the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, reviewed the data from the existing on-bill program and then went to its network of lenders to educate them about the program and get them comfortable providing capital at affordable rates. They were able to connect a few lenders with a muni utility, and ultimately one lender was selected. And this is all to say that green banks can have a role in influencing and helping to move energy efficiency markets without playing a direct lending role. So I wanted to close by talking about where green banks get the capital to do the work that they're doing. And there's really no place we've worked where we've had trouble identifying financing and barriers in clean energy. These gaps are persistent and exist everywhere. However, finding the capital to address these barriers is almost always the trickiest part of the equation when starting a new green bank. There's a lot to consider when thinking about capitalizing green bank, and a lot of lessons to be unpacked from the routes that have been taken in other geographies. To date, green banks have largely been capitalized by state funds and/or philanthropic dollars, and we anticipate that will probably remain true in the near future. However, there's a new potential capital partner that's emerging that I do want to highlight, and that's the federal government. A bill to create a national climate bank has been introduced in the House and Senate. That bill would create a $35 billion pool of funds that would not just invest in projects directly, but would also provide investment capital to state and local green banks. So as this comes down the line, we're encouraging states to think about laying some of the groundwork now for creating a green bank and potentially accessing that capital in the near future. Great, well, thanks very much, and I will pass that back to Jen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jill. Yeah, I'm super excited about that National Climate Bank as well. Real quickly, though, Jill, there was a question that came up that was specific to your presentation that I will just throw out there for you. Can you explain the difference between secured and unsecured lending?
Yeah, sure. So these are general terms, and what that really means is that in some cases you have an asset that is being pledged as collateral for the loan. In some cases, you don't have that asset. So, for example, your mortgage is secured because if in the event that you don't pay, the bank can take your house. Your credit card is not secured because there's not an asset that really sits behind that. So you have to look at things like someone's credit score or their income or other types of factors to evaluate how risky that investment is. And that can be difficult for businesses who don't have a lot of assets, who haven't been in business for a long time, for people who aren't homeowners, things like that. So thinking about expanding unsecured lending is often a way to get to expand the pie of who can actually access financing.
Wonderful, thank you. And that is a perfect segue, I think, into our next presentation, which is designed to address some of those exact constraints. So on Bill 101, I'm really excited to have Wesley Holmes from Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance on the line. They just launched, I think many of you have read, a new report on Bill. And so welcome, Wesley. We look forward to hearing more about it.
Great, thank you. Jen, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Terrific. Okay. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the invitation to talk with you all today about some of our work on bill financing. So the first 3 slides, real quick overview for those who are not familiar with us. Jen, if you want to move to slide 2. So Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, we're a regional energy efficiency organization working in 11 states across the Southeast. Cover a variety of different topics around regulatory policy, building energy codes, electric transportation, and energy efficiency financing. You move to the next slide. So we started looking at energy efficiency finance as a key issue back in 2014. After all the years of investment through the Stimulus Act and the Recovery Act investment, a lot of people were very aware of what are the opportunities and how much energy could be saved and money could be saved by making investments in upgraded advanced energy technologies, improved energy efficiency performance, and so forth. But it never really solved the problem of, great, I know about all these things, but that doesn't mean I've got money to invest in it. And for the most part, a lot of the products and things that were available weren't available to the most at-risk, most vulnerable, most negatively impacted and energy burdened communities across the South. So we started looking a lot more at how can you create better access to capital in the region. And we looked at a variety of things through supporting traditional credit unions and banks throughout the Southeast to try targeted products for energy efficiency. We came to find that banks were just really not well positioned to move those kinds of things. They didn't have much incentive to move them because they're not the kind of larger loans they like to take out. I mean, typical investments range from $7,000 up to $10,000. That didn't really inspire a loan officer to do a whole lot of effort to move a lot of those. They wanted home mortgages and car payments and things like that. So where they did try them, their hope was that they could be kind of a carrot to draw customers in for more expensive lines of credit. And ultimately, they're bankers. They're not people who know how to sell home energy science, which is really what it takes. They're not like the contractors are good at having kitchen table conversations with a homeowner to help them understand how their home uses energy, how making these strategic investments in key areas in the house would result in savings. So there was just a lot of kind of institutional barriers to making banks really effective at moving those products. But what did emerge clearly was that the banks and credit unions that were allied with utility companies as marketing partners and outreach partners, they far and away had the highest levels of success. So we started taking a lot closer look at what utilities themselves were doing in terms of addressing the financing gap. And to that, I guess I can just talk a little bit about, slide 4 is just kind of why we went into on-bill financing to begin with, which you can see our core focus looking at that was looking at electric member cooperatives, which I'm sure most of you know, electric member cooperatives are the principal servicers of rural communities throughout the South and throughout much of the country. And that's where we find a lot of the pervasive poverty counties, a lot of the older housing developments, a lot of elderly populations living in homes that were built in the 40s, the 50s, or hadn't been retrofitted since the 70s. So there's a lot of pretty pervasive energy issues throughout rural America, and a lot of poverty inhibiting access to capital to do anything about it. And co-ops have traditionally really played important leadership roles in bringing economic resources and economic development to rural communities. And so we wanted to look at what they were doing to address built environment opportunities. And we discovered a lot of them were already experimenting with versions of on-bill financing. You can move to the next slide. So a quick rundown on terminology. So on-bill financing, on-bill repayment, and on-bill tariffs are often generically referred to as just on-bill financing kind of writ large. But there are some important distinctions in these programs. So on-bill financing is where the energy retrofit is financed by the utility company. They put up the money, they make the investments, and the debt is owed back to the utility company and collected on a monthly fee attached to the person's power bill. On-bill repayment it's a similar service. It typically runs the same way, but in repayment, the utility is just acting as a collection agent. So there's a third-party bank, a credit union, or some traditional capital provider who's putting up the capital, and they're the ones actually making the loan to the homeowner, which means the homeowner is subject to the bank's terms for creditworthiness, FICO scores, available collateral, all of these things. And then there's another version of these programs, which is called an on-bill tariff. Tariffed on-bill programs, it's a similar model. Functionally, it works the same, but the key difference, tariffs are not loans. Tariffs are the common method that utilities across the board use to finance all manner of infrastructure build-outs. If they need new substations, power line upgrades, or new generation facilities, they pay for a lot of that infrastructure build-out by attaching a tariff to all the ratepayers' bills. And that's how they spread that across the rate base. So years ago, some folks came up with the idea, well, why don't you use that tariff authority, which is very broadly defined state by state, giving utilities a lot of discretion in making their own determination of what is a needed utility scale investment to make that can be collected through a tariff fee attached to bills. And so the key difference on the tariff versus the other forms of financing is that it allows a little more flexibility in terms of who gets to borrow, the terms they get to borrow capital, and it doesn't show up on that person's credit report as taking out a loan. There's a next slide talks a little bit more about some of those key differences. Yeah, so the key things on the loan versions versus tariff versions. When it comes to loan versions, loans typically have to be tied to an individual. They're tied to the person and their credit history. And that's what the lender wants to know about is, can this person be relied upon to pay back this investment if we give them the money? They're subject to traditional loan underwriting criteria. Typically, it's only going to be made available to property owners because they need that form of collateral as the safety for making those investments. A lot of times they're not going to be able to do any kind of disconnection for not paying back these loans. Utilities lose a bit of leverage when it comes to being able to collect their debts. I will say off the front that none of these loans, whether they're issued by banks or credit unions or utilities or any other entity across the country, we haven't seen actual defaults of energy efficiency loans above 2% anywhere. And in most cases, programs show default rates of less than 1%. So they're actually very, very safe loans. But still, the qualifying criteria for those leaves a lot of people out of the loop. And the other hurdle with that is that it's not transferable. So if you've got somebody who's moving houses, they're disincentivized to take out a loan to fix the house they're living in if they assume in 5 years or so they may be moving out or moving to a new location. They don't want to carry the debt for that investment with them when they leave. So tariffs offer some solutions to that. A tariff investment is going to be tied to the building itself. It's tied to the meter. It's looked at, what we like about it is that it recognizes that increasingly houses and buildings with the developments of on-site energy generation, on-site energy storage, whether through power walls or electric vehicles and garages, they're increasingly becoming more of a two-way street for electrons, not just the end of the line. And with the introduction of demand response technologies, where you can modify water heater load or thermostat settings or other temperature settings, they can actually become a much more dynamic part of how utilities manage their grid. And as that technology evolves and becomes more ubiquitous, increasingly buildings become a functional portion of the electrical grid, not just the last stop for electrons. So more and more that's taking utilities beyond the meter. And we think the tariff mechanism then is an appropriate mechanism because it actually supports broader grid-wide services, not just the benefit to the actual homeowner themselves. Another part of that is that the utility gets to determine the creditworthiness. So things like bill payment history rather than FICO scores can be the determining factor. You don't have to own the house you're living in. You can just be a renter. That's always been a huge barrier, is that people who are renting are paying the power bill, and the person who owns the property isn't bearing that cost burden. So they're less incentivized to make the investment. So this program allows whoever's paying the bill on the meter can participate in the program, provided that the homeowner basically signs off and allows the home to participate. And along with that, if the renter or the homeowner decides to move, that investment stays with the meter, and when the meter gets turned on by the next occupant, they pick up the payments on that investment. So it's a more equitable kind of distribution of the cost and benefit for people living in the property. So on this slide, you see this is some of the on-bill programs across the Southeast. There's between 20 and 30 on-bill programs available across the country. There's a variety of different ones. Arkansas has a couple of loan programs and a very successful tariff model. Georgia's been running a loan-based model for several years. Kentucky's been doing a tariff for a number of years. And of course, South Carolina is actually a standout. The Help My House program that I know we'll be talking about a bit later is, I think, the most successful version of the utility-based loan model in the country right now. And recently, Appalachian Electric also launched a program. And soon to be coming, I'll go ahead and forecast, we are expecting that Georgia Power will be offering the first investor-owned utility offering of a tariffed on-bill program here in Atlanta, starting sometime this summer. We have to have more details on what that program model is going to look like in April. But it's very exciting to see investor-owned utilities move into this space because they serve such a large swath of customers. And we know a lot of the other IOUs are watching that closely to see if they could explore it as well. You move to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just real quick. The typical improvements for on-bill programs are really the low-hanging fruit for energy efficiency. So duct sealing, air sealing, adding insulation, installing programmable thermostats, and targeting kind of key energy consumption systems like HVAC units and swapping them out for heat pumps or more advanced tech or higher SEER rating things. But typically those investments are going to range from about $7,500 up to about $10,000 is the average level of investment across the country. Next slide. So I wanted to take folks through a couple of examples of three models in action and just look kind of apples to apples at how folks are doing in these three different models. So the HELP program, the Home Energy Loan Program that's in Arkansas, that's a tariff model. Help My House in South Carolina, that's a utility-sponsored loan model. And then in Georgia, we have the third-party loan version called Georgia Home Plus. Next slide. All right, so Georgia Home Plus, third-party loan, they started back in 2014. There was a pilot of it from 2010 to 2013. There's about 8 utilities who were running it currently today. That's a drop from the 24 who tried it from 2010 to 2013. Since the key differences between the pilot and what they're doing now, during the pilot years, they were able to use some of those Recovery Act investments to basically buy down interest rates to zero. And when you're offering 0% capital, they flew off the shelves and did really great and moved about 1,500 projects. Since the funding for the interest rate buy down went away about in 2014, they've done about 270 since then. So it's really slowed down to a trickle because we found that there's really only a small percentage of a customer population who has a house that if you make this specific investment will have relative assurance that it'll achieve like a 20% energy reduction, which is the typical target, and have adequate credit and adequate motivation to take out a loan to do these things. So they went from seeing 50 a month to 2 to 3 a month. Next slide. All right, South Carolina. I won't spend too much time on this because I know we've got a much better expert to tell you more about it. But just high level, they started the program back in 2011. There's about 4 utilities currently participating with more on the way as I understand it. They've done about 794 loans to date, and that's as of, I'll say January of this year. Typical loan size here is about $10,000, and collectively they've been able to invest over $7 million across the state in energy efficiency projects. Next slide. This is the Help PACE project. This is run by Ouachita EMC, which is in Southwest Arkansas. They use the tariff-based approach. They started this in 2016 following an unsuccessful effort to do a loan-based program in the community, which just did not get uptake. Since they moved to the tariff model, they've been able to, as one utility, fund 500 residential and institutional projects. That's single-family homes, multifamily properties. They've done some community college facilities, police stations, really just kind of across the board of building use types. They've financed the project for those in their community. They've also been using it to support, which is, I think, one of the first in the country trying this, using the tariff on-bill model to support solar investments. And they've done about 30 solar projects to date with that model. Average investment for their property is about $5,600. They put over $5 million in the community as a whole. And I will note, as one unexpected outcome of this, they were able to reduce their electric demand significantly enough that they actually petitioned to reduce their rates for their utility customers. They were able to cut enough waste and add enough new solar to their system. That means they don't have to buy power from their generating facility that they used to buy power from. So they've actually requested to cut rates by 4% across the board, essentially spreading that value saving across the entire rate base. Next slide. So here's just a kind of a quick apples to apples comparison of all those different metrics side by side. One of the things that stands out is, using the tariff model, they've been able to move at a much faster rate. People are more willing to sign up for the tariff-based model than they seem to be for loan-based models. So that's allowing a lot more volume to come out of a single utility compared to the debt-based mechanisms. But otherwise, a lot of similarities. So interest rates are comparable between the tariff-based model for pays and the Help My House model. Similar levels of investment, even though it's different numbers of utilities participating. But the one common thread across all these programs is all the utilities, especially cooperatives, need programmatic support to deliver these. So in many cases, they have either established a third-party entity to help with the financial side of managing these programs, or hired contractors to help run the program implementation side. So there's a handful of companies out there who specialize in managing on-bill programs, and they're increasingly overprescribed to help run these. So that's the common thread across these, is that utilities need whatever support they can get in terms of access to capacity to run these programs. Next slide. So I real quickly wanted to touch on some of the demographic considerations for these programs. Next slide. Wanted to highlight, again, this is just a breakdown of the pervasive poverty rates on a county by county map. And so electric cooperatives actually serve about 90% of the persistent poverty counties in America. And persistent poverty county is a way of describing, it's a term defined by the census. And it means that, I may get this wrong, but it's 20% or more of the population in the county is below the poverty level, basically for multiple generations. The South has the highest number of those nationally, where people have been stuck in cycles of poverty for 20, 30, 40 years in different counties, and it's really hard to break that cycle. Next slide. Okay, so just a slice of kind of what these demographics look like. So Ouachita Electric, not a large utility, 8,500 meters, mostly residential, housing stock between 50 and 100 years old. Typical income is about $29,000, which is significantly below the Arkansas average of $42,000. They started their loan program in April of 2015 and converted to a pays model in 2016. So the next slide will give you kind of a comparison of what the switch was. Participation tripled, moving it from a loan option to a tariff option, actually tripled the amount of enrollment. They went from 70 single family homes doing the loan model to 118 single family homes doing the tariff, plus 82 multifamily units and 2 commercial units. The average investment doubled, because knowing that it's not a debt tied to the individual, they were much more willing to take out or to invest larger amounts of money into the property. So investments went from about $2,000 to near $6,000. And that led to a total investment tripling from $500,000 to 1.6 million. And that's old data. It's now 5 million. Just in the past year since I first did this, it's gone up that much. Next slide. So this one's a little closer to home. This is your neighbors to the north, North Carolina. Roanoke EMC also offers the pay-as-you-save tariff on-bill program, following a similar story as Ouachita. They tried a loan program for a couple of years. People just couldn't qualify. The people they wanted to reach the most either couldn't access it or weren't willing to access it. They have average household income about $39,000. Spend, almost half their customers spend over $200 a month on their bills, which is about 48%. 30% is the national average for how many spend that much. So they started a loan program in 2014, didn't see much movement. So in 2015, they went to the PAYS model. Next slide. They went from essentially nobody participating in the loan program to 250 people signing up in the first year to do the tariff program. They didn't move any dollars through loans, but they moved an average of $7,200 per loan, or rather per investment, through the tariff model, and have to date put in, I'm going to say it's actually now about $2 million in total into the community in Roanoke. One more slide. So this is our best understanding from the folks in the field about why the tariff seems to increase participation. Loans have downsides of difficulty qualifying. There's consumer aversion to taking loans for invisible EE upgrades. People take loans for granite countertops and doors and windows, stuff they can show off and feel good about, but they're less willing to spend that kind of money on insulation and ducts and caulk and things they can't really show off to their friends. In addition to that, the people who most need these things are low-income populations who are already burdened with debt and not really interested in adding to that pile. So upside of tariffs, they're not loans. It's easier to qualify and it transfers with the property. That addresses really the key issues that a lot of borrowers express when considering these loans. And so that seems to be a big part of expanding adoption writ large. So we have spent a lot more time kind of focusing on promoting that model as the most effective means to reach new populations. One of the things I do want to reinforce is that tariffed on-bill programs should not be thought of as low-income programs. They are low-income accessible, but they are meant to serve all income streams. And it's really what makes these so, I think, appealing across the South is that it's not about a person's income level that determines should they get to participate. It's really about the engineering question of, if we make these investments in this property, in this structure, will it result in savings? That's really the benchmark of qualifying. And so it's more accessible to all customers and has broad application for all kinds of customers, regardless of their income level. But it has proven to be the most effective means to reach low-income customers in particular. So I'll stop there. I may have gone over my time, but if there's any questions, happy to answer them. Oh yes, I will note we did drop in our links here. We have recently published the Utility Guide to Tariffed On-Bill Programs. This is our most comprehensive resource to date on telling people, one, helping you understand what the model is, how it works, along with all of the resources that we think are the best practice example of the different resources people will need to develop or provide to regulators or policymakers or planners to move these programs forward. So when you follow that link, it'll take you to that guide, as well as links to all those good resources that can help folks get started with that. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Leslie. And I think, I believe that the guide has actually been distributed out to the EE stakeholders, and it's also available on the SharePoint site. So that you can also access it there, but certainly go to the CIO website and see all the other great resources that they have there. Yeah, I'll just ask you, there was a question that I would love for you to touch on before we move on to Mike. For on-bill programs, do renters have to get permission from the owner to do the upgrade?
Yes, they do. There's an element within the contracts that I've seen before that essentially details kind of who's responsible for what in terms of signing up for an on-bill program, but the homeowner can essentially sign an agreement that says their renters can participate in the program, and then they get to enjoy investments in their property that are being largely paid for by their renter occupants. And the renters, for their benefit, get to realize immediate savings on their power bill and just a better indoor air quality and quality of life. So everybody wins in that scenario, in my opinion.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, there are a lot of great programs out there, and thank you for showing us just a few of them. Really excited to do a deep dive now into the Help My House South Carolina program. And Mike, I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about your program.
Thank you, Jen. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yep.
Awesome, cool. Well, if you go to the next slide, please. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you all today. I'm Mike Smith. I work for the Electric Cooperatives in South Carolina. It's an association of the electric distribution cooperatives. It also includes Central Electric, which is the generation transmission cooperative. So I did have the chance to speak with probably many of you all a few weeks ago about our program. So I'm not going to get into the same detail I did previously. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the mechanisms and then the on-bill financing part. And so our program, and Wesley did a really nice job of explaining the terms and some of the distinctions. One of the things that we attempted to do without going to a tariff is to kind of split it between being an on-bill financing loan and an on-bill tariff. And I'll say it in this way. What we need is the ability to secure the loan. We talk about secured and unsecured loans with the service of providing electricity to the home. And so back in 2010, the South Carolina cooperatives, along with some other parties, put together and got a law passed that allows on-bill financing with a certain criteria that allows us to have some of the characteristics of a tariff, so to speak. And so Section 58-3750 allows all utilities, and not just the cooperatives, to move forward to loans that are tied to the meter service. That gives us the opportunity to cut off power for lack of payment. The loan will stay with the home or business if the home is sold. It also allows you to have a loan with a member who's a property owner or a landlord-tenant situation. There are certain provisions that allow for that. And yes, as Wesley said, the owners must sign on, the property owners, because as part of this provision, if a property is rented, since we have on-bill financing, there is a loan amount tied to the meter. Let's say it's $60 a month. The person who pays the electric bill is paying for the improvements, and a renter would be very surprised if they all of a sudden had a $60 charge they knew nothing about. So the landlord is responsible for letting them and notifying them of the upcoming charge on their electric bill once they get service. And if they don't, then the landlord has to pick up that charge for half of the term of the rent. And then the renter pays the last half of it. And of course, with these provisions, since we're securing it with service, it really eliminates the need for a traditional credit check. Next slide, please. For those of you interested in kind of digging into the details of this, you can go to the South Carolina Code of Laws, Title 58, which covers all of the things that govern us with public utilities, service, and carriers. And if you'll click it one more time. And if you dig down in it, you get to Section 50, which talks about the nuts and bolts of being able to have a loan tied to meter service. Next slide. So what this on-bill financing does, it allows us to finance for our members energy efficiency measures with very low interest loans. And according to the statute, we can charge up to 4% plus the 1-year Treasury rate. And I was looking today before this meeting. So what is the 1-year Treasury rate? Well, it was up over 2% not that long ago. And in the last 2 weeks, it dropped from over 1% down to 0.4%. So right now, we can engage with the member to have work done on their home and charge them up to 4.4% interest for this financing. Like I said, the loans are repaid on the monthly utility bills for the terms, and our typical term is 10 years right now. And the biggest thing, and this is what Wesley had pointed out, it's not a low income, moderate income program so much as it allows, without the credit checks, low and moderate incomes to participate. Because really, when it's done well, even with the loan payment, your electric bill should go down overall if you choose the right energy efficiency to be done in the home. Next slide, please. And so, just going back to the beginning, we started with a pilot back in 2011 to test this on-bill financing statute and our ability to effectively weatherize homes. With the 125 home project, we've been doing this for 9 years now, and we have 4 co-ops that are actively, soon to be 5 co-ops that are actively participating in the Help My House program. Some of the basics are it's convenient, it allows on-bill repayment. Of course, if it's done well, you improve comfort and you get the energy savings. By having the utility involved, and this is a really important thing, is it's a third party, and so the contractor that's actually doing the work, they've been qualified, they participate in the program, but they're not the ones that determine the scope of work. We have a third party or a member of the co-op go out to the home and check for opportunities for savings. Usually we replace the HVAC unit. A lot of times we replace electric furnaces with heat pumps. And we create a scope of work that will, for the most part, guarantee savings enough to cover the loan. And because we do the audit in and the audit out outside of the contractor, it really does manage the QA and QC very well. And like I said, it's low interest loans, and no money down is a big help. Next, please. Really quick, here's the flow of how it goes. A member can come to the utility, or we can scrub the energy use of our members for high use and identify homes that would be good candidates. We identify a home, we talk with the member. Sometimes we can do either a virtual audit or a visual audit by asking questions or going out to the home and seeing if it looks like a good candidate for a program. If it looks like we need to go to the next stage because of high energy use and no outstanding health and safety issues, we order a comprehensive audit, which involves a blower door, duct blaster, crawling around the attic, crawling around underneath the house, identifying ducts that are broken, disconnected, and so on. Hazardous situations, checking for gas leaks with propane, because we have a lot of our members have propane on site. We do a comprehensive audit, and out of that audit, we look at the results and we create a scope of work, and we model predicted energy savings. And so with that, and if we go to the next step, that it looks like it's a good home, it qualifies well, we do a little bit of education with the member to talk about, okay, if this work is done on your home, these are your projected savings, and if you want to select a contractor, we can get them to bid on it, and then once they do a bid on the home, we'll know what your loan amount will be. And so the contractor bids the home, it's agreed to by the member, and what we do is we go to we actually have a loan closing because we know what the amount's going to be, and with the loan closing, the contractor then goes out 3 days after the loan closing because we do have to follow loan laws or banking laws in this case because it's not a tariff. The contractor goes out, does the work on the home. We send a third party back out to make sure they did a good job. And if everything's good, then KW Savings or the co-op pays the contractor in full. And then we put the loan on the member's electric bill for the next 10 years. And that's pretty much the process. Our average loan right now is close to $10,000. Next slide. This was touched on by Wesley. You know, this is the kind of work that we do in a home. We seal and insulate, a lot of duct work. Sometimes we install vapor barriers if we're having some health and safety issues. A lot of replacing electric furnaces with heat pumps, especially in manufactured homes. Over 40% of the homes and we've done 800 homes to date on this program, over 40% are manufactured homes, and I'd say 97% of those are double-wide manufactured homes. And then we repair or replace older heat pumps. And so a lot of our times our members don't have the ability to get a new heat pump. Their unit's been down for 6 months or a year. So even though the energy use hasn't been that high, we still consider including them in the program because we know that they're terribly uncomfortable and they're just kind of stuck. A lot of times they will buy air conditioning units to stick in windows to make it through the summer, or they buy extra space heaters and just pretty much burn electrons to get through the winter in a couple rooms of the house. Next slide. And so this is from our pilot. This is from the 125 homes we did, what we realized and modeled was we estimated $1,157 each year would be saved from the improvements that we did on the home. When we looked at the loans and the loan payments over that same year, the repayment was only $869. And so then we were left with a balance of $288. And this is really, this is the money slide right here that basically speaks to how you can include a low, moderate income and not put additional financial burden on our members. Next slide. Just a couple other risk management. We've touched on a lot of this already. The loan is tied to the power meter. It is transferable to the next homeowner or to the next tenant. There is no need for credit checks, but we do check the electric bill payment history. And I've already addressed the no pay, no power, and the thinking in our experience is there too, that the national default rate on power bills is really small. I mean, people like their power. Unfortunately, they sometimes will do without food or medicine, but keep the lights on. And there's some tough decisions being made out there. Next slide. And that's it. Let me look real quick, because I did take some notes, but I think I touched on all of them with between what Jill and Wesley said. So I'll just wait to hear the questions from here. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. So yeah, now is your chance, everyone, to send in your questions. I do have one other one here, which I will ask, and I have a few of my own, but I'd love to hear your questions. So go ahead and put them in the chat box. The first question that I have is for Jill. Jill, in your opinion, what is the single greatest barrier or reason why we don't have a green bank in South Carolina? Is it pushback from traditional lenders or something else?
Ooh, yeah, great question. So I would say that pushback from traditional lenders, in most of the places where we are helping folks start up the green bank, there's maybe some a little bit of skepticism up front from traditional lenders about how this will work with their programs or will it compete with their programs, maybe some early questions like that. Usually as we get further along in the process, the lending community gets pretty excited about it and is usually a source of support for green banks. So I would guess that's probably not the main driver. I would maybe go back to what I was saying at the close of the presentation about capital, and that really is just the biggest barrier to setting up a green bank in any geography. And I would imagine it's also true in South Carolina, sort of developing a line of sight towards where that capital is going to come from. And we've seen states go about this in different ways. A couple states have found sort of large sums of capital that they've kind of put in up front. But increasingly, as states are trying to move towards a more lean model, we're kind of encouraging them to think about how can you sort of construct the capital stack in a more graduated way. So is there something you can get started with a couple $1 million, get some lending activity going, and then start to look towards other sources of capital?
Thank you. And actually stay on the line, Jill, because another question is, what is the average interest on green bank loans?
Yeah, so it really varies. I would say the right way to think about it is, in general, we're not talking necessarily about really cheap capital. So if you're looking for 0% or 1% financing, that's typically not what green banks are offering. They are sort of developing a risk-based view of pricing in the market. What I think is different about green banks, or how they kind of can address markets that are underserved, is one, being able to take on risks that other traditional lenders aren't willing to take on, and then two, being able to work with people on kind of some thorny issues like very small transactions, really complicated transactions that require new structuring, things like that. And that's really where the capital starts flowing, not necessarily because the rates are super low. That being said, if a rate was above 5 or 6%, I'd be pretty surprised. But that would be sort of a unique situation in the market.
Great, thanks, Jill. I'm going to throw a question out there back to for on-bill, so either Mike or Wesley or both. So you were talking about the amount of savings that occur, and that it generally does not put a consumer or a homeowner over their what they're actually spending today. But are these savings guaranteed, and what happens if the savings are lower than expected?
This is Mike, and I can address it for our program. So, and I think I qualified it when I showed that slide. I mean, ideally, you project, you model the savings greater than the loan payment, and you hit it too. But it's tough sometimes when you're going in and replacing a new HVAC unit, doing significant duct work, insulation, and so on, to even get it to where you model savings that will equal the payment, because it's expensive to do these things, especially as the interest goes up. but there, and sometimes we do include homes that do not even model payback. But what we do is we have the homeowner, we acknowledge it, we explain it to the homeowner, and then we have them sign a document that says, for them to acknowledge that their average electric bill will go up, is anticipated to go up, may go up, if they take on this loan, even with the energy savings. As far as a guarantee, there is no guarantee of the energy savings. I mean, things do change in the homes, and how you use it, even between one homeowner and another, or someone coming home over the summertime, can make a big difference. I will say this, though. In our pilot program, what we modeled and what our members experienced was within 1%. So we modeled 34% savings, and on average, our members experienced 33% energy savings. But it varied. Some of them were as high as we modeled 30% savings, they achieved 60%, and we had some members that actually used a little bit more. And in that case, they actually changed. They went from heating with other things like kerosene or wood. And so we were kind of expecting their savings not to be there, but they were in control and more comfortable.
Great, thanks. And Wesley, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, just I'll add the pay-as-you-save model, the prominent tariff model people use. They do try to make clear to customers that your savings are going to be averaged across your year. So not every single month may be lower than it was before you had the retrofit, but your peak months will definitely be significantly lower. And so kind of even if you see a marginal gain on a average day in the fall, like your huge spikes that you saw in the summer are going to go down. And so overall across the year, you definitely experience savings, but they do try to prepare them for, you might see a bill higher this month from relative to last year, but if you look at it in aggregate, it's significant savings that help pay for any increases due to behavioral or what have you. Also, just in terms of contracts, they do have pretty strong QA quality assurance, quality control procedures. So if something's just egregiously not working, like it's obviously not resulting in savings from day one, there's agreements between the utilities and the contractors that the contractors have to basically go back, find what's not working, fix what's not working, or they're going to end up on the hook. If it's something mechanical that the contractor did, it has to get fixed. If it's something that's resulting of change in behavior, or you decided to buy a hot tub, that's going to be on you.
Good point. No new hot tubs.
Right.
Thank you. Another question on the on-bill side. How do you secure the loan for renters? The eviction rate in South Carolina is pretty high. Are the owners also signing on for the liability?
In South Carolina, the person getting the service is the one that pays it. So if the landlord takes and pays for the electric service, they'll pay for it. One thing that is a little bit unique, if the meter goes dark and there is no service, then there is no loan payment and there is no accrual of interest. So a 10-year loan is 120 payments. We do the amortization chart. It may get a little off on the when it's paid if the meter goes dark for 3 months, but for the most part, it's when you get service, whoever is paying for the service pays for the loan. But the landlord does sign on as a responsibility to let future tenants know.
Okay, that's a good point. So it's up to the landlord to inform the new tenants that this tariff or this loan repayment will be on their bill. Let's see, I have a question. It's going back actually it's a combo question. For all panelists, what are your thoughts on how a theoretical green bank could administer on-bill programs across the state? What would that look like?
Yeah, so I can kick things off here, and I think it would really depend on a couple of different things. One thing we've noticed from the work in Colorado with the municipal utility there is Colorado's huge number of municipal and co-op utilities. The one that the Green Bank was working with there was pretty sophisticated and had a lot of capacity for administering the on-bill program themselves. And what they were looking for was really some help finding the outside capital to make that work. For some of the other utilities, they're smaller. They have less experience doing financing, and they're really looking for some help on the technical assistance side to actually set up the program and maybe possibly administer it. So that's a role that the Green Bank there is thinking about plugging into. And depending on sort of interest in the state from and capacity at the utility level, that could be something that would be useful to have for a statewide entity. The other place the sort of obvious place it could be useful is if there's some sort of need for capital in the on-bill programs. The Green Bank can be helpful in both sourcing that capital either through third parties or maybe off its own balance sheet. And given the fact that it understands the nature of on-bill and the kind of risks that are associated with it a little bit more deeply than maybe some traditional lenders, it could be a source of affordable long-term capital. But those are just some preliminary thoughts.
Great, thanks. Mike or Wesley, anything else?
Nope, I don't have anything in addition to that. I think she covered it pretty well. I mean, we've seen there have been requests of people to help manage the financial transaction or to also shoulder something like a loss reserve as kind of an administrative function to help cover any perceived risk. But no, I don't have anything in addition to that.
Okay, great, thank you.
I don't have anything directly. I guess, are there in some Green Bank situations, this I guess is a question more for Jill, does the utility have to buy in?
Yeah, by buy-in, do you mean does the utility have to be, what do you mean by that? Do they have to be on board with
Well, I'm just thinking of, okay, if you have a South Carolina program, is it available to all South Carolinians? Or does the utility have to be even more than a willing partner, almost a proactive partner to, I guess, get it onto the, because does this go on the electric bill? Typically, these loans?
Yeah, so for the couple of on-bill programs that I highlighted in the presentation, yeah, that's on that's through the bill. So the utility would absolutely need to be a partner in those situations. In other sorts of Green Bank lending and energy efficiency or solar or whatnot, utilities sometimes participate, and sometimes, particularly if they have incentives that they're already running, it kind of makes sense to couple those. But it's not a sort of a necessary condition to hit for any green banking program.
And so then you end up with a separate loan payment, I guess, for the term of the loan. And the differences between when it goes on the electric bill or it's a separate loan payment, how do the default rates compare?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yeah, and first of all, your intuition is totally correct. That if it's not through the utility bill, which most Green Bank lending isn't, at least so far, then it's a separate loan agreement, just like you have with your mortgage or your car loan or whatever. And what's been interesting is the default rates have been extremely, extremely low. The energy efficiency program I talked about first, which was about the unsecured energy efficiency lending, I mean, the charge-off rate looks pretty similar to the rates I've seen for utility bill payments, even though it's not secured by the customer bill, which is, I think, kind of dovetails with something that I think both of the other panelists mentioned, which is that people just think about energy differently than they do about paying other types of bills, and they're getting benefits every month from it. And as a result, the risk there is really quite low. And it's useful to have a lending partner that understands that and can kind of price it appropriately.
Good, thank you. An idea on funding a green bank. Could a Roundup program be used to start a green bank, a Roundup program on the bill?
I'm going to confess that I don't know what a Roundup program is.
So it would be like a voluntary, if my bill was $15 and 50 cents. I'd round it up to 60.
Oh,
The 50 cents would go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So it's interesting. We've talked in a couple places about doing like forms of crowdfunding for the Green Bank, particularly at the local level, with some cities that want to start them, or maybe not seeing the support at the statewide level. There's been some interesting discussion, but it's never actually happened where you have sort of individuals sort of contributing to it. I would say personally, I really like it as an idea, and but should love to think about how that could work. But yeah, to date, unfortunately, we haven't quite seen that any examples of that live.
I would like to add, because we had this not specific question, but a roundup question a couple weeks ago in a meeting I was in. And I was surprised. If you do the numbers, I think there's a little over 2 million utility payers in South Carolina, or maybe not quite 2 million. Then even if you collect it from every utility in the state, a roundup is what it does. It rounds up to the next dollar. Let's say if you average 50 cents on a roundup bill, 50 cents times 12 is $6 a customer. So you're barely getting over $10 million, even if you collect from everybody in the state. So I was surprised at how much money is not collected. I mean, 10 million is a lot, trust me. But when you disperse it around everybody, remember it comes down to $6 a person. It might not be enough to manage.
Yeah, and these questions around the a right amount of capital for the Green Bank is something that comes up in a couple different contexts. And you're right. There has to be some sort of minimum, because it's very difficult to administer any sort of financing program with only $1 million of capital. So we usually kind of set a floor around 6 to 8 million for just thinking about starting it. And then that obviously sort of varies depending on what particular market barriers you're trying to target.
Great. I want to just pull it out a little bit more broadly now. I mean, we're on the line and we're educating a lot of stakeholders, but how do we collectively educate a larger group of stakeholders on these different types of financing mechanisms and the benefits they can bring? Any ideas?
Well, so I'll offer for SEIA's perspective, what we've been trying to do, there's a couple of prongs to that. I mean, so for our purposes, what we've been trying to do is just raise the profile of the programs that Mike and others are running as just good teachable opportunities for other utilities in the space. The idea of utilities making investments beyond the meter is still relatively new in the space, and there's still some, I'll call it cultural resistance to that idea as expanding the role of the utility into that space. But it's increasingly kind of gaining in prominence, and people are seeing how it could be applied to a broader suite of services and technologies and create other revenue generating opportunities for utilities. So there's definitely plays to be made in terms of a utility leveraging the mechanism as a way to deploy advanced energy technology like electric vehicle charging stations, or power walls, or solar, or demand response. So as utilities are looking at beneficial, or what they call strategic electrification opportunities, where they want to see how can we support more electric demand in the face of declining rates, we view tariffed on-bill or on-bill programs in general as the kind of necessary mechanism to get that technology into the existing building infrastructure. So that in of itself has kind of raised the profile of the program model to folks. And we've been fielding questions, like an increasing volume of questions from a number of utilities over the last few years. People who weren't willing to talk to us about this or weren't interested in it are now becoming interested in it. And so we're seeing kind of a flurry of activity that indicates that there's, I guess, buzz about this rippling out throughout the industry. And what we're focused on doing is, okay, how do we get it into the right hands of the right, essentially the right trusted advisors to utilities? So we're interested in supporting their state co-op associations, large G&Ts who provide shared services for them. Also working recently, we've been having a lot of conversations with their capital providers. So there's a couple of really big banks who are the principal loan providers to co-ops around the country. And they're paying attention to this now, and they're starting to reach out to us with interest in how can we be teaching and engaging our prospective borrowers about this program model, and should we be making capital available in targeted products to serve that function? So getting those key folks, so their utilities aren't necessarily going to come to me with that guidance. They want to hear from the people who they've reliably done business with for decades. So they're lenders who evaluate risk for a living are really key stakeholders in helping to promote the security of these loans and support kind of the standardization of this offering, which is really what we're pursuing. In addition to that, having just larger utilities make it available. Right now, it's a lot of small to mid-sized cooperatives doing it, but having investor-owned utilities do something at a bigger scale, so like a Georgia Power, a Duke, a Dominion, having those folks move into the space raises the profile for a lot of people. And it also gets that's usually what it takes to kind of get more public representatives involved, more regulators interested. So that's what we're focusing on, is just raising it with the people who reach a broad audience and have the credibility to promote it.
Like, thanks, Wesley. And so, kind of a follow-up question to that. If there are utilities out there listening, or maybe to the future recording, what would be a good way for them to find out more information? Would it be to go through you, or are there other organizations that they could learn more?
So there's a lot of great organizations out there who are working on this. The Energy and Environment Study Institute was a good partner to South Carolina cooperatives in helping them get Help My House going. So they've got a lot of good resources on this. You can, we've worked to try to make SEIA a good central repository for the information that's available. And we've worked with we've worked with all those other nonprofits. So if you can come to our website and you can find links to other organizations who can also be a resource to you. But yeah, there's a handful out there, so yeah.
Thank you. That is all the questions I have. I did have one kind of request for you all to join a panel, which I will send to you separately, so be looking for that. Thank you, Natasha. So other requests, please feel free to send them to those panelists. I'll just leave you with this last question. Is there anything else that we have not discussed today that you would like to just tell everybody about?
This is Mike. I just appreciate being able to participate with you all today, and thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, same here. This has been great.
Yeah, likewise.
Absolutely. And thank you all for your time and for your expertise. This has been fantastic. And so I want to thank you to the speakers for jumping on the line. Thank you to the participants for your questions and for being engaged. And everyone, be safe and healthy, please, over these next few weeks and months. All look out for each other. So thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your day.